We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Elon Musk and his infamous Twitter files have captivated the nation as the internal memos and messages detail what seems to be a bias against conservatives in general and President Trump in particular. Most notably, it appears that the company under previous ownership had regular meetings with federal officers. Now, did this violate the First Amendment clause of the Constitution? To figure that out, we're joined again by Mr. Scott D. Cosenza to figure out the legality, the constitutionality, and the likelihood of what happened here. Scott, I have one question for you. Did Twitter, under previous ownership, violate the First Amendment?
So instead of answering you yes or no, what I think I would suggest is that the question be posited thusly. Did the government Twitter interaction violate the First Amendment rights of some people? And I think the answer to that question is yes. And the reason why I changed the question is Twitter is a private entity. I don't think they are charged with upholding the First Amendment. They don't have the power to.
They don't have a
Amendment
responsibility to adhere to it, yeah.
Yeah, the First Amendment is a restriction on government action. The government will not violate the rights of the people in a certain manner. Now, did the government violate the rights of the people in colluding with social media to restrict their messages and dampen their speech? Well, it's a debatable point, but I think yes, it is the restriction. You know, if I'm free to speak, there's something called a solicitation of trespass in the law, which is kind of interesting, Mark. And in some places, this is a forbidden act. And what it means is you'll often see where these are kind of popular YouTube videos. Somebody's videotaping the police, and they're doing so from like a parking lot of a store. And the store owner hasn't complained about the person videotaping, but the cops don't want them there. So what they do is they go and they solicit from the store owner a trespass warning for the person so they can then order them off the property. And that's not a proper use for the police, because they're then frustrating that person's First Amendment right.
Yes.
And if the police ask Twitter, I think, to stop allowing the speech of citizen A or B because of the messaging, that they don't like that messaging, well, that seems to be a clear violation of the tenets of the First Amendment, even though they're not the ones that are actually, flipping the switch to turn the account off or turn the mute button down on the, what do they call it, the reach, I guess, of the of the postings. So I hope that satisfies.
It is an interesting answer, Scott, and I'm glad that you rephrased the question to something a little more specific there, because if we look at what happened was, according to the Twitter files, and as of now, we have no reason to disbelieve that the messages posted within those Twitter files, reporting by Barry Weiss and Matt Taibbi, are fraudulent, or as the case with the Hunter Biden laptop, nobody has yet accused it of being Russian disinformation.
Oh, yeah, there's and Schellenberger too, and it's all it's all coming from the inside. So I'm saying the veracity is I mean, you don't say beyond question, but there's no credible claim that this is anything other than the goods here.
And so what you had was a number of government agencies approaching a private company, and as you point out, this invited trespass sort of thing, asking them to either shut down or limit the scope or the reach, basically de-amplifying the voice of certain people. And in some cases, those people got banned. And specifically, we're talking here, I think, about banning was President Donald Trump. Now, when he was banned, I believe it was January 8th, 2021, you had a number of world leaders, Angela Merkel, Emmanuel Macron, and President Labrador of Mexico, all expressed their Manuel Obrador something of Mexico. I'm sorry, I do apologize, Mr. President, El Presidente. I have got your name wrong there. But they all expressed shock at the fact that he'd be removed from the platform. And of course, the messages seem to suggest that they could find no good cause for removing Donald Trump, and yet removed him anyway. Now, would Twitter, the people involved
Mark,
in that...
He was Donald Trump. I mean, I don't understand what you don't get about that. Orange,
but it's
man,
as they
bad.
say, show me the man and I'll show you the crime, right?
Yeah.
So
you're part of the problem.
this, I mean, I think everybody agrees this was a massive overreach. The internal documents showed they didn't have cause to remove Donald Trump, correct?
Well, do you mean so? What the internal documents show is that according to their own rules, Donald Trump did not violate the rules in order to merit a suspension. If his name wasn't Donald Trump and he was president of wherever is Stan, he would have
Let's
an
say,
active
for
Twitter
example,
account
he
today.
was president of Iran and he called for the eradication of the Jews in the Jewish state. Just for example, let's use that as an
Let's
example.
have some cultural understanding, Mark. You sound like a real
because of course
type.
that tweet wasn't removed, by the way, I might add, from the Ayatollah. That still stands, right?
What the people inside Twitter said were that Donald Trump's statements could lead someone to perhaps commit violence, and that therefore that was it's not even a fig leaf, it's a shadow of a ghost of a fig leaf that they were going to cover themselves with to justify the suspension of his account. And they had never before pulled somebody's account forever for anything, I think, short of an actual direct threat of violence. So that's the other thing, that it was an indefinite suspension. It went directly against Dorsey's commandment that suspension should have a fixed term.
And of course, directly after the Twitter ban came the Facebook bans, the YouTube shutdowns of people who were interviewing Donald Trump. And I think it created a roller coaster. It was the straw that broke the censorship camel's back and just allowed it all to collapse. So where does it go from here, Scott? Where do we go? Where does any, I mean, here's the thing, right? Who's to enforce this? Who's to figure out who's to blame and who's to hold the government to account in this situation if account is needed to be held? Who investigates it other than the people who were the ones who were going to Twitter and saying, hey, we think you should shut this guy down?
We know about it.
It's a mess.
And it's ultimately up to the people to enforce it against the politicians. If they, it's our job to report it and get the facts out and for people to look into it. And it's, the volume that we put behind it is because of the magnitude that we think the story has, the importance that it has. And people have to decide what to do with the information. But it's not like there's an attorney general that's going to come in and prosecute somebody for this.
I thought Merrick Garland was non-political.
Yeah.
You're telling me that he might not investigate.
He's working hard on it. Yeah.
He'll speak to his friends at Twitter and then decide whether to investigate, right?
Somehow, some way, I'm confident of all the charges that might be brought, those won't be included amongst them.
Scott, we will keep following this story, the Twitter files, the fallout from it, and any accountability that happens if it does. And you are right. It's all about regular people amplifying their voices and demanding answers to satisfy their needs and wishes. Scott DeCosenza, thank you ever so much.
Thanks, Mark.
And that's about all we have time for on this week's edition of Liberty Nation Radio here on the Radio American Network. I'd like to thank our guests, Tim Donner and Scott DeCosenza, for joining the show. And of course, thank you, the listeners out there, for tuning in. My parting shot this week is a simple quote from Thomas Paine, who said, "A body of men holding themselves accountable to nobody ought not to be trusted by anybody." And with all that's happening in government, social media, and indeed the world at large, that's good advice to live by. As Scott pointed out earlier in the show, real accountability rarely comes at the hand of the government or the corporation, who have their own vested interest in either obfuscating the facts or maintaining the status quo. It comes from you and I, all of us, the people. Thanks for listening. We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides. Entertaining, informative, and just plain fun. Watch Liberty Nation's The Conservative 5. Produced by conservatives for conservatives. C5's The Left Free Zone. Hosted by Liberty Nation's Lisa K. Donner. Joined by a raucous, irreverent panel of authors. Deconstructing leftist narratives. Debating the hot topics. And remembering to laugh. Join the official conservative safe
You only
space.
did that to piss Jeff off.
Liberty Nation's The Conservative 5.